Whenever you're ready.
I'm ready. Cult film for me is anything that is extreme. A cult movie also tends to be something that doesn't hit the first time out. It languishes in film festivals like Raindance or on the bottom shelf of DVD stores, and then suddenly is discovered, usually because there's a strong interaction between the fans and the actual movie. Well, my favorite cult film, being a Raindance person, is The Blair Witch Project, which we had at Raindance about 10, 11 years ago. And that whole thing is a perfect example of a film that was created by the, if you like, the myth or the chatter by all the people around the film in the lead up to its big premieres. If I could predict the next cult classic, I wouldn't be standing here shivering. But I can't think of a specific film right now, but there are certain films that tend to be genre-based, could be science fiction, or a topical film, a film that is so nasty in terms of what it's challenging.
Can I talk to you or talk to Dan? Just talk to you. What defines a cult film is something that defied the conventions of the time, maybe. A film that went against the grain. Then you've got the guys like Russ Meyer, and maybe kind of like Roger Corman, who are making stuff that's incredibly trashy, and is meant to be trashy, and it's kind of seen as being trashy at the time, but then like in retrospect, sort of 20, 30 years later, it begins to acquire this kind of weird cultural significance, because actually buried inside these like trashy movies like Faster, Pussycat, Kill, Kill and Vixen and Super Vixen and all that kind of thing, is this sort of kind of women's lib stuff, these like mad 60s cultural, socio, you know, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean for me, like, because pretty much every film you just mentioned I haven't seen, although I know about all those filmmakers, probably because of their cult filmmaker status. For me, cult film, the other ones that I can think of, there aren't very many to be honest. They're like way more mainstream things. Like the one that comes to mind is Fight Club. Okay, for me Fight Club is just a cult film just because when it came out there was so much excitement around it. Maybe because it happened to be the first film that was a major seller on DVD, and the packaging was so great, and the visual style of the film was so amazing, and David Fincher was so cool and whatnot. Also because it was unexpected. I remember seeing pictures of Fight Club before it came out, and it was just Brad Pitt, you know, like with his top off, and people were like, oh, Brad Pitt's hot. This is going to be a Brad Pitt being hot film. But it turned out to be something so much more.
It also massively took hold of sort of pop culture as well. You remember the face cover with Ed Norton? It's like just one of the best magazine covers of all time. You know, I think that it
took on Tyler Durden's clothes, all beaten up.
Yeah,
so obviously no one knew why he was wearing Tyler Durden's clothes until they saw the film.
Yeah, it was amazing. So it kind of took on a wider significance. You know, kind of. The thing about Fight Club, I think, is because another element is that they're kind of misunderstood at the time. Where like Fight Club came out and creates this huge argument about that it's about fascism and sort of the male ego and all the rest of it, and actually almost a bit like Verhoeven, Starship Troopers, it kind of comes out, and some people kind of see it as being this. And Robocop, the same thing. This, you know, banal, straightforward action movie, and actually it's a satire of all these things. It's a pleasure because it's a really good movie. I think as well for cult films, I bet half the reason they're cults because no one's ever seen them. These are the films that people talk about like they have seen because they're kind of meant to have seen it, but no one's seen them. That's why they're cult. Otherwise they'd just be mainstream if everybody had seen them.
I mean, a cult is a cult. It's what people want to see. Cult film is a film that sometimes isn't a success the first time around. I would say that films become a cult because audiences keep coming back to them. Breakfast at Tiffany's, that would be a cult film. Eraserhead, Withnail and I. They're films that an audience will return to again and again and again. You do find that films perhaps that were important to people in childhood, like Ghostbusters, Pretty in Pink, Ferris Bueller's Day Off, all people return to, so those would be cult films as well. Withnail and I is, first time round, it wasn't particularly a success, but each generation, because it has a kind of humour that people can identify with. It doesn't matter whether you're 50 or 20, there's still stuff in there that people enjoy, so no.
And your favourite cult film?
With Nell and I. Without question, I can see that once a year and it still makes me fall off my seat with laughter. Dazed and Confused, Breathless, all films that people continue to go and see that have an audience. They might be a bit edgy. Cult films coming up, I would say, would be Kick-Ass, Moon, and even further down the line a town called Panic.
The idea of a cult movie, I think it's quite broad. I was thinking about this before you came. I think there are various ways you can define a cult movie. You can define a cult movie, I think, a film which in terms of its content is maybe politically or socially outside of the mainstream. So a film that deals with kind of racial or political issues. In a more fun sense, a cult movie can quite often be a film which is so bad that it's good. You know, the obvious example is the films of Ed Wood Jr., which are, you know, Plan 9 from Outer Space, which is a film that's made so cheaply they actually had to leave all the mistakes in, so they didn't have time to re-edit. Another way which I think a cult movie is popularly understood is a film which came out and it didn't maybe get the reception it deserved on release, and has since gone on to have a life amongst cineasts or DVD buyers after the fact. And I think probably the best example of that is something like Shawshank Redemption, which I personally think is a really overrated film. That's just my personal opinion. This is a film that came to light after its DVD release, with people rediscovering it, and I think once people rediscovered it, critics came on board and began to kind of widely praise it. And then the cult around that film developed. Donnie Darko, the Richard Kelly movie, would be another good example, a film which wasn't particularly successful in cinemas, but then you had a whole band of people talking about the film, film enthusiasts, cineasts, and getting together and watching it in a home movie environment. And it kind of took on this life of its own. A cult movie can also be by a director who has a kind of very small but select following, so the early films of David Lynch, Werner Herzog, John Waters, who kind of falls into that so bad it's good, you know, he has this kind of trashy aesthetic with films like Pink Flamingos, which is one of the ultimate cult movies and also one of the midnight movies. You know, Midnight Movie was this phenomenon of films that played at midnight screenings in New York and then ended up playing in the same cinema for years. I think Pink Flamingos played for like 2 years and people just kept coming and coming. It's quite a broad term, and some people take it more seriously than others. As I said, you know, some people think of it as a bad film which is so bad it's good, as, you know, Death Wish 3, which we mentioned, which Edgar Wright showed in a midnight movie slot. But for some people it is more serious than that. The other example I was thinking of is a film called Freaks by Todd Browning, because quite often cult movies, they often contain explicit or dangerous, transgressive, I think was the word I used, content. But quite often there are also films that are banned for a long time, and Freaks by Todd Browning, which features people, you know, with real handicaps, circus people, was banned for something like 30 years and has only recently come to light. I mean, that's widely available on DVD. So DVD's been quite good at bringing these cult movies more out into the open. These cults, they kind of develop clubs, you know, people meet and they even dress up like characters from the film. You know, we recently did a screening at Curzon of Bad Santa, with people dressing up as Bad Santa characters. You know, Wizard of Oz is another classic cult. Rocky Horror Picture Show, which is perhaps one of the ultimate cult movies. You know, people go along and it becomes much more than a screening and a film. Yeah, I mean, the film that I happen to be personally particularly fond of, and I think it fulfills all the cult criteria, and I think it will be a future cult, is Werner Herzog's version of Bad Lieutenant. Bad Lieutenant was obviously originally made by Abel Ferrara, and is itself a cult. And the film is so bizarre. There's a sequence which is already becoming quite famous, which is shot from the point of view of 2 iguanas which are in an office, and it's beginning to, you know, people on internet chat rooms, you know, and the internet and Facebook and Twitter is a great way of, I sound like Jonathan Ross then. It's a great way of spreading the word on films, and people are beginning to talk this film up, and I do think it is one of those films that is very enjoyable, but it certainly offers a very singular viewing experience. It's fantastic, and it's out at the end of May.